Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But DC politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Archaeology Show. TAS goes behind the headlines to bring you the real stories about archaeology and the history around us. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeology Show, episode 301.
On today's show, we talk about the Sutton Hoo helmet, again, obsidian artifacts in Alberta, and the latest pseudoscientific news out of Egypt.
Let's dig a little deeper into those big old ancient city chambers.
Nope.
Yep.
Nope.
I want to take an old Egypt Uber. Ancient Egypt Uber. Straight down into the city. I just want to get through the bedrock and have somebody pick me up and say, welcome to our city.
You think it'd be like a flying car situation?
I do, because they've been around for 5,000 years. They should have flying cars.
Are they like hiding down there waiting?
They are.
Okay, got it.
All right. See you in a minute. Welcome to the show, everybody.
Hello.
So we are going to talk about our visit to Stonehenge.
Yes.
But there's some really cool news, and we wanted to take a break and, do a news show because we're a news show.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the articles, the first one we're going to talk about here, actually relates to the British Museum. So we were like, okay, we've got to pause on Stonehenge. We'll do a little more research, and then we'll, cover that next week or the week after, or whenever it fits into our schedule. We're not making any promises.
Right. We'll give a quick little life update. We have the haters out there that just want to hear about archaeology. You can just skip ahead hit your skip button probably 2-3 times if it's 30 seconds. It won't be long. Yeah. But we're back in the United States.
Yes.
We're in California. Yep. And we're actually, it was my birthday yesterday. Yeah. And, we're actually in a transition because it's a Saturday, Sunday. We usually drive on the weekends.
Yes.
But it was actually kind of cool because we're in Lodi, California, and we spent the night there last night, and we have a wine club here that we are participating in, and one of our favorite wineries is here, and we're going there this afternoon after our recording, and just a really cool place.
Yeah, it is really neat. And then we're on our way to Reno after this, which for those who have been listening to us for a while know that that's where we started RVing from. So we're kind of heading back to check on our storage unit, say hi to friends, that kind of stuff.
In a TV show.
Yeah, you are still paying for that, right? The automatic payment still coming out of our account.
As long as I see those get debited, I'm pretty sure it hasn't been auctioned
we're good.
Off.
We're good.
We just got to make sure it hasn't been overrun with mice or something. So.
Yeah, definitely need to check that. I mean, yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so that's what we're doing today.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, with that, let's jump into some articles here. So there's been some developments, or at least some connections with the Sutton Hoo helmet.
Yeah. And so we just saw that in the British Museum last week.
The actual Sutton Hoo.
Not in the episode last week. We talked about it. We weren't there last week.
No, last month, though.
Last month. Yeah, about a month ago.
A month ago soon here.
Yeah. So... But it was amazing to see it in person. It's an artifact that we've talked about quite a bit in the past because the Sutton Hoo burial is just super amazing. And there's a really cool movie that came out about it a couple years ago, too. So we've recapped all that. We don't really need to do all that again. Yeah. But I do recommend going to listen to the British Museum episode if you haven't yet. It's kind of long, but we talk about this and all the other cool things that we saw there.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So this whole Sutton Hoo thing, one of the things that was obviously found there was these fragments of this helmet worn by the person who was presumably buried in the ship.
That was buried in the Viking ship burial, basically. Right. And it's fragmented, of course, the helmet is. But one of the things that they did at the British Museum is they both reconstructed the fragments that they had and have that on display. But they also did a full reproduction of what the helmet would have looked like in its heyday, too. And I mean, it would have just been a stunning piece of artwork, essentially, fully silver and kind of a bronzy gold with all these stamped images all the way around it. And of course, don't forget your little brush shaped mustache, because obviously those mustaches were very important
Yeah.
You had to take your mustache with you into the afterlife, apparently.
Of course. So, it needs to be accurate. How will you be recognized?
I know. Yeah. I think that's my favorite part is like that, like tiny little mustache that's on the front of the helmet. So anyway.
Right. Well, a new connection between the Sutton Hoo burial in the east of England and Denmark has been made, of all places.
Yeah.
And this connection comes from a recent discovery in Denmark.
Yeah. So there's this Danish stamp that has the... Well, so a stamp would have been used to stamp an image into metal, right?
Yeah.
And they have found a Danish stamp, or I think it's been in a collection for a while, but they've just recently made this connection between the stamp and the Sutton Hoo helmet. Yeah, it was discovered a while ago on the Danish island of Tsingy, and it depicts a warrior on horseback. But what is interesting here is that this Danish stamp, has crazy similar motifs to the ones that are found on the Sutton Hoo helmet.
Yeah.
And that would be, in particular, this like horse and rider imagery.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
They aren't exactly the same, but there are a lot of similarities between these two, like depictions of the ears, the manes of the horses, the noses, tails, and so forth. So the Danish stamp is also the exact same size as the images on the Sutton Hoo helmet.
Yeah.
So when you're going back to, say, the 7th century, these are a lot of coincidences that would be hard to call coincidences.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think anybody is going to call them coincidences because these cultures influenced each other quite a bit in this area and in this time period. But it's worth pausing the recording and going and looking at the image of the reproduced Sutton Hoo helmet. It's in the article that we linked to, but you can see how the size really is interesting because there's one photo of a researcher holding up the stamp, and it's smaller than your palm, right? And he's holding it up between his fingers.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the image of the helmet, you can see that these are like 2-inch by 1.5-inch like rectangular images. And that stamp that the researcher is holding up is the exact same size as the stamps on the helmet. So that's where you can really see how similar they were and how that stamp would have been used to make something like this too, Yeah. And all the images are different too. Well, not all of them. There's some that are the same, but there's a lot of different images on the helmet as well. So yeah, just really cool to see how similar they are and how they would have been used to create something like this.
Yeah. So what they're talking about here is the possibility that the Sutton Hoo helmet was in fact either produced in or influenced by workshops in southern Scandinavia.
Yeah, definitely.
And that would have implications between, trade routes, some sort of diplomacy between the two areas, or, political entities, I guess.
Yeah.
In the 7th century. Yeah, it just opens up further dialogue between the two areas.
Yeah, for sure. And we knew that they were exchanging information because you can see that sharing of knowledge between all the different peoples of these areas. But when you find such really similar motifs, then for sure they must have influenced each other somehow, right?
Yeah.
And we see these similar motifs in Sweden and in Germany and like just across all of like broader Northern Europe in this time frame. So
it sounds like Scandinavian artists were somewhat well known for their artistry, and that, just because of the Sweden and Germany connection, and then now a Danish and English connection.
Yeah.
Well, what became English.
Yeah, right.
Whatever it was back then.
Like
Anglo-Saxon, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
But it sounds like these connections, people were aware of it and it's like, hey, we need to have something made. We know where to go, right?
Yeah.
And it just sounds like those trade routes were fairly well established, or at least known about.
Yeah, they had to have been. And like these scholars are suggesting that the Sutton Hoo helmet might have been an heirloom or diplomatic gift from another region. So maybe from Denmark, possibly, right? So it might have been a diplomatic gift. But because we see these similarities across Germany and also Sweden, like it could have been a diplomatic gift or a purchase, like maybe somebody bought it, like from any of these areas, really, because they're sharing all of this artistic influence, essentially. So, yeah. I
mean, maybe when this, guy from Sutton Hoo was over in the Kingdom of Mercia getting his coconuts, decided he needed a new helmet and went up to Denmark.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he needed coconuts because those were their horses.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, yeah. Okay. Sure. That works.
My Monty Python reference for the episode.
I know.
Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah. No, anyway, so it's just cool to see that and to connect up yet another culture into this whole like interconnected Northern European thing in this time frame.
Yeah, it also brings up, I guess, some interesting questions too, right? Because we've had the Sutton Hoo helmet since, well, 1939,
30s, right? Yeah.
Right? We haven't necessarily had it fully reconstructed.
Yeah, I think that happened like maybe in the 50s-ish, right? Yeah.
It's been a little more recent, but there are artifacts that have been excavated over the last 100 years plus, definitely the last 100 years though, across Europe, Scandinavia, the United Kingdom, all those areas. And there are probably connections that we don't even have any idea about, right?
Yeah.
But it's going to take one of probably two big things to really start making these connections. The one thing that has always made these connections is grad students that need projects.
Yeah.
Right. And people that have this passion or at least this academic connection to a certain thing. And then they start just saying, okay, what are all the things I can find that are even remotely close to this? And as we start building databases of different things like motifs and stuff like that, you can say, show me all the horse and rider motifs found in Scandinavia and Europe. And as people upload these things, you'll be able to find that stuff and say, okay, well, this is crazy similar and it dates to the same time period, and start making these connections, right? That's the one thing. Yeah. What's the second thing that start making these connections? AI.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. But that's good. That's a good use of AI, right? Like they can, my buddy chat.
My God. Rachel lately has been giving AI pronouns, and while I am a huge supporter of AI, I'm not about giving them pronouns yet.
That's fine. So
I just said them.
Yeah, you did. It's really hard not to, because like when you're getting help from an AI, bot or whatever you call them, it's really hard to not start talking to it like it's another person, because it like becomes very conversational sometimes. Anyway,
that's what it wants you to think.
I know, right? But yeah, no, that's a good use of AI though, because there are probably like a human eye can certainly look through and pick out similarities and differences between these different artistic motifs, right? But AI can do it so much faster. Yeah. And it just seems efficient to me to use AI to get in there and really do that. So yeah. The other thing that's really interesting to me about this is you have an artifact with an artistic motif on it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's great. But artifacts move. They travel. They go from one place to another. They're a diplomatic gift, as this research is insinuating. Like you don't always know the origins of them. So when you have these dyes or the cast that makes the shape, and you find it in a place, in a workshop, somewhere where somebody was using it to make that artistic motif, that gives you like the true origins of it, right? Mm-hmm. So I almost think it would be more interesting to try to like look for these stamps and use those to kind of create this map of where all these different motifs are coming from. That would be really cool. And then overlay like the artifacts that show those same motifs to see how they're traveling out and away from these different regions. Right. How cool would that be? Oh my God, so much work though.
And I'll just mention as we close out this segment, the one problem with something like that always is, and it really frustrates me with stuff like this, especially as I've worked with, WildNote, the company you worked with in the past, and a few others before that. You intersect some of these data sets that are out there, right? As you work with these companies. And the biggest problem is always twofold. One, it was some sort of awesome data set or program or whatever was put together by a university as the big entity, right? Often. And then at the lowest end, it was actually put together by either a person or a team in best case scenario. And then funding has to keep this thing going. Yeah, websites require money, right? They do. You have to put things into it. So if it doesn't have ongoing funding, which a lot of these things just simply don't, or if they don't have an ongoing champion to continue to find ongoing funding, because let's face it, grad students move on, professors move on, people move on, right? So if the university or the department or whoever is not backing it continuously, man, it just completely falls apart.
It does.
And I have no doubt that something like this may even have been put together and fallen apart, or something like this does exist and it's sitting on somebody's hard drive right now.
Yeah. Well, and the other problem too is the consistency, right? Like you might have this information in 4 different museums and universities across Europe, but it's been entered differently by different people. It's got their different biases inherently in it too, which is another problem. But bias is the thing that you can get beyond when you put enough effort into standardizing things. But the data and the databases themselves, when they don't play well together, it can make it really difficult. So that's just yet another like stumbling block with this kind of research. But man, it can be so cool if they can get past all of that.
Well, it's kind of ironic we're talking about that because such a database is being put together for Alberta, a province in Canada. Yeah. So let's learn about the glass trails they're putting together as we learn about the Obsidian and the story of ancient Alberta. Oh my God. Back in a minute.
Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But DC politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
Welcome back to episode 301 of the Archaeology show. Stop shaking your head. Stop shaking your head. All right. So why Rachel was laughing at the end of the last segment?
I know. I couldn't contain myself. Yeah. You specifically told me not to, and then I did it anyway.
So why she was laughing is because I was reading something that was written for us by AI because we have been exploring just, you take an article, and you should try this actually. Yeah. You can use the free version of ChatGPT. You can use Gemini, which is Google's version. Incidentally, Gemini is being inserted into all of your Google products. I don't know if you knew that, but it is now. It's out of beta, basically. We're coming out. But anyway, it's all about the right prompts. Yeah. And if you prompt one of these AI programs and with something similar to the effect of summarize this article and, give me bullet points. If you just want to see something in a very certain format, right? Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes it will go crazy. And we don't use it. No, but it's interesting to see what it comes up with. Well,
it's just, honestly, it's almost like not quite right. And it like went, I don't know. It wasn't what we wanted for the show.
And you really have to fact check. It's, yeah,
you do. But it comes up with some like very AI sounding like funny titles. Like,
and that's what it did.
Glass Trails, Obsidian, and the Story of Ancient Alberta.
And I looked...
Sounds like a Netflix documentary.
Right. It's Glass Trails : and I looked up Glass Trails. I tried to Google it, and I looked up Obsidian and the Story of Ancient Alberta. Both of those are original, as far as I can tell, original phrases. Yeah. That what a ChatGPT came up with. Yeah. Which is impressive in its own right, to be honest. It's a little corny.
Funny. It's corny,
but it's impressive that, it wasn't ripped from somewhere.
Yeah. It sounds like it should be the name of like a book or a documentary or something. Anyway, it was just, funny.
Anyway, I had to say it because it was so hilarious.
Yeah. We've been talking about how Glass Trails is going to be like the name of our next podcast.
Oh my God. Honestly, a podcast about flint napping and different types of materials and things like that. Yeah. I don't know how I could keep that one going forever.
That's a very
niche podcast.
Very niche.
Yeah. Yeah. I say niche. You say niche.
Niche. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, either way. Yeah. It's very, it would be tough, but that's what it would be called.
Okay. Yeah. Enough about AI and how it's not helping us.
Right. So this article, though, we talked about an article a few months ago, and there's been a lot of cool stuff found in Canada lately. Yeah. And we talked about an article a few months ago about this site that is challenging sort of some assumptions about the early peopling of the Americas and movement and things like that. This is a little bit different, but along the same lines, because this is more of a longitudinal study. It's been going for over 10 years now. Yeah. And this is relating to some research and really some summarizing of some research and things like that on this big study that's been happening.
Yeah. And this is one of those sort of comparative compilation studies where they're looking at a lot of different material across a certain area, Alberta in this case, and from a bunch of different sites. And they're taking that, putting it into a database, and then able to do like pattern identification on where these sources are coming from. Right. So yeah, we'll get into it though. I'm kind of jumping ahead there a little bit.
So here's the big thing. Yeah. This study again has been looking at archaeological sites all across Alberta, Canada. And Alberta, in case you're wondering, is right in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
It's right above like Wyoming, Montana. Well, not Wyoming, kind of, but Montana.
Yeah.
Wyoming doesn't border Canada. I know that.
No,
Montana
it sure doesn't. Montana.
But it's all part of it, actually.
Yeah.
And because, prehistorically, people didn't know there were states and countries. So you have to kind of factor these things in when you're looking at sources. But Alberta includes Calgary. That's probably the biggest city within Alberta.
And it's right on the western border, too.
Yeah, right on the western border. But Alberta's a big tundra type area, right? It doesn't really include the Rocky Mountains or the Canadian Rockies.
No, not really.
And it's
a little plainsy almost.
It's very plainsy.
I think we've heard Carlton talk about Alberta a bit in his Great Plains podcast, which is it's a great place to go learn more about these areas. So
and the reason all that's important is because there's a lot of archaeological sites up there, and they don't find a lot of obsidian on these sites. They find some obsidian, but the obsidian they do find, here's the key thing here is it did not come from that site.
Yeah, no, it
didn't come from anywhere near that site.
No, there's no natural obsidian in Alberta, and the reason for that is because it's volcanic and it comes from volcanoes,
there's no volcanoes.
Which there's no there's not even real mountains in Alberta. I mean, I guess there's slope. Yeah, exactly. So any obsidian that they find on these sites came from somewhere else.
Came from a long ways away.
Yeah. Either down in the States, or it might be from over in the Rockies to the west, but definitely not from Alberta itself.
Yeah. So they've used dating in other contexts on these sites. They're looking at, in this particular article, some of these artifacts. So some of the obsidian artifacts date back to 10,000 to 13,000 years. The artifacts in the study date back 13,000 to 300 years, because they use obsidian just basically as far back as they have archaeological sites is basically what they're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Throughout time.
I mean, 10,000 to 13,000 years ago is like basically when people first started appearing. Yeah.
So. But anyway, you can date obsidian, sort of. It's this rind that sort of builds up around an obsidian artifact after it's removed from the source, removed from its core. And that depends on a lot of environmental factors. So if you know about, through other sciences, the environment that's taken place back, every 1,000 years or so back through time, then you can use very complicated mathematics and graphs to say, well, this rind would have built up on the obsidian flake or whatever in this predictable manner. And then the thickness of that could indicate a date with really big error bars.
Right.
So
I think probably a better way of dating these sites is probably just comparative relative dating on these sites. Yeah. Cause these are being pulled from sites that have other artifacts on them and probably features hearths, things like that, which carbon that is much easier to date.
Yeah. Well, some nerd over here is on page 3 of their calculations. Some other nerd over here is like, well, this pottery definitely dates to 8,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, maybe not 8,000. That's a little old for pottery.
Yeah, pottery.
But
sorry.
Scratch that.
Oops. Anyway.
Yeah, you get what we're saying though.
So one of the things, cool tools that they did actually use to find out where the obsidian comes from, because that's another thing about obsidian, is obsidian has very particular chemistry to it. Basically, every volcano that spews out obsidian has different chemistry inside of it. And you might think all obsidian kind of looks the same. It really doesn't. It's got the same basic structure to it, but it's not all the same. And they use what's called X-ray fluorescence. And there's a portable machine now that's been around for at least a decade, if not longer. That's called a PXRF, or portable X-ray fluorescence machine. It looks like a radar gun, actually. If you see a cop standing on the side of the road,
right.
They're not X-ray fluorescing you. They're radaring you, but it looks really the same thing.
Yeah.
And they kind of just point it at a rock, or they hold it on the rock, and it pulls all the trace elements out of it.
Can you just do this like right in the field? You can just like stand there and just boop, like right there.
You can hold it on a rock wall.
Man, that's so crazy. The technology is really advanced, because like you remember back when we were working on that pipeline in Nevada, we were collecting obsidian artifacts for X-ray fluorescence. But it definitely wasn't a handheld thing that they were doing in the field. We were like collecting actual flakes to get sent out to a lab. So
from what I understand, these things aren't cheap either.
Yeah.
And just to have field techs jockeying one of these around in their backpack.
Maybe you wouldn't want that to happen. Yeah.
But then again, is it cheaper to, in the long run, ethically, to have one of those in your backpack than to collect these off of a site, because you're never going to bring them back.
Right.
And once they're collected, they're out of context and you can't bring them back.
Yeah, definitely.
You can give them back to the tribes and they can ceremoniously rebury them somewhere, but they're out of context now.
Yes.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, source regions identified include, and this is why I said Wyoming, but Idaho, Oregon, Wyoming, Alaska, British Columbia.
Yeah.
Not Alberta.
No, not Alberta, because there is no obsidian here. And there is a super, super cool map in the article. So pause and go look at that. It sort of shows where all these sources are. And then like kind of arrows pointing to where those sites were found in Alberta. So, and then they did that source analysis. The author of the paper is a guy named Timothy Allen. And what he did is
Tim Allen authored this paper?
Yes, Tim Allen.
Okay.
Yes. Maybe, I think he goes by Timothy. Let's just go with that.
When he's doing academic research.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's more than 520 archaeological sites that are identified in the province. Stop it. You and your 90s references.
A little more your show than mine.
Yeah, actually, that's true.
Yeah.
So they found fragments of obsidian at 285 archaeological sites in the region. And then Allen did analysis on 383 fragments or specimens that were that came from 96 of those sites. So basically he kind of filtered through to get, the right kind of samples so that he could get the data that, he needed. So anyway, this is from 96 different sites. And what they found is that Bear Gulch in Idaho, the 62%. I just thought this was cool, this breakdown. So Bear Gulch in Idaho was 62% of the samples, the location, the
assemblage.
The source. And then Obsidian Cliff, which is part of Yellowstone, that was 30%. And then the other ones, there's a couple others like Mount Giza in British Columbia, and then the Anaheim Volcanic Belt, which is also in British Columbia. Those were pretty big contributors too. But anyway, those two that are the biggest source locations are from so far south, like way far south.
Yep. Good thing there weren't tariffs back then.
Hello.
Too soon?
Truth. Speaking truth. Anyway, these regions are like up to 1,000 miles plus. Kilometers. Oh, sorry. Kilometers.
Kilometers. Yeah.
Yes. Kilometers from Alberta.
It's about 600 miles.
Yeah.
But plus, this is a range.
Yeah.
Right?
This is a range.
They're a long ways away from Alberta is what we're saying.
Yeah, for sure.
So what all this means is either there's evidence of long distance trade routes. And what that honestly does mean is it's not like you've got this road and maybe you've got, people in their little wagons, hawking obsidian along this trade route.
Right.
You've got groups of people along, different areas, and they're probably, group A trades with group B trades with group C trades with group D. Yeah. And by association, group A is trading with group D. Right. But not directly.
Yeah.
So that's usually what that means. Now you could have some people who explore further off and go do things. Those are probably your one-offs, but more likely you're trading locally. Yeah. But the trade locally is nearest neighbor trading. Right?
Yeah. And something as special as obsidian is going to be a valued trade artifact, So like I can just imagine that would be a really, really good currency in this barter trade world that they have going on. Yeah.
Yeah. This all supports because of the way this obsidian traveled and things like that, and the antiquity of it. And some of these sites does support some of the ice-free corridor theory of human migration, of this movement through glacial pathways, because there's a huge, I can't remember what the name of the glacier that was on the British Columbia side, but I think the other side was called the Wisconsin Glacier. Anyway, there was a huge ice-free corridor basically up through Alberta. Yeah. And that's why Alberta has so many sites. Yeah. But that are so old, right? But basically it was right up through there, and that would have that does support this.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other thing that is cool is that a lot of the highest concentrations of these obsidian artifacts are found in bison jumps. And bison jumps are such a cool idea that prehistoric peoples came up with.
That's so cruel.
It is so cruel, but I get it, right? They got to eat. But what they would do is they would drive these bison herds off of a cliff and I guess incapacitate enough of the bison that they could get in there and probably kill a whole bunch of them. And then it would feed their tribe or their group for weeks on end. But they find this high concentration of obsidian artifacts. So shows you that they were valued for doing this kind of hunting, right? It also might mean that groups are coming together from a larger region to do this kind of hunting together, because it does result in a large amount of animals that need to be, processed and dealt with.
and I've heard some discussions around this too. I just got to say one real quick thing. You look at the past, and people are always point to the past, especially the deep past, and say, oh, we had a much deeper connection with the past. And we were so connected as a people, whether you're talking about Native Americans or, indigenous, 10,000, 5,000 year old European ancestors, or Africans, or whatever group you're talking, indigenous Australians, whoever you're talking about. Right. You always say that. But then there's always these examples of just like people basically trying to do things the easiest way they possibly could, which only makes sense. But there were definitely bison jump kill sites where they don't know how many people showed up for this event. Right. And it could have been a small number of people saying, OK, this is the most efficient way we have to do this. Here's a herd of bison. Let's run them down these fence ways, these trackways, or just corral them with other people. Yeah. And run them off a freaking cliff. And they could have killed hundreds of bison to feed, dozens of people. Yeah. And we know for a fact that a lot of that meat would have gone bad. They had no way to preserve it, no way to do anything with it.
It would have been too much for one small group. And it would have been
incredibly wasteful. But the way they saw it was there's 1 million bison out there on the plains.
Yeah. And I mean, at that time, that preserving the population probably wasn't... That's not the first thing they're thinking of. It's
they never
survival,
thought of that.
Right? Yeah. So
I mean, to them, there was an unlimited number of bison, and there always would be.
Right.
There always has been. There always will be.
But I would imagine that through time and refining of this process, they realized how many bison they would get by driving them off a cliff, and that's why these larger groups would have come together to do it together, because there would be enough for everybody.
Oh, if you need feast day.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it didn't have to be feast day.
No, it didn't have to.
Could have just been we're hungry day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway. Yeah. So this was one of those studies like we were talking about in the last segment that's really neat and kind of brings all this together. And, because not all of the sites that were in this study, obviously, none of the sites were excavated probably by this guy.
No, not at all.
These were excavated over many years.
Yeah.
And this is just an analysis, a macro analysis of all these things.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It's just taking that source, taking the sources from these obsidian and then just mapping it. It's plotting things on a map. Where it came from and where it ended up. So it's really cool to watch that migration, though, because it had to have been people interacting to get it from one place to another in some way. However, they were doing that, whether it was coming together for a bison jump or, transferring it from one small group to another until it got from, group A to group F. Yeah. Yeah. Whatever that was. So it was cool.
All right. Well, that was the end of our show as it regards good science. And now we're going to do the pseudo-archaeology part of the show at the end of this.
Yeah, we had to talk
segment
about this.
3. We have to talk about it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the vast underground city beneath Egypt on the other side. Back in a minute. Hopefully there's a spaceship. Welcome back to episode 301 of the Archaeology Show. And all right. So this has been going around.
It has.
Yeah.
It got brought up in a meeting at work where people are asking me about it. And I'm like, it's definitely suspect, but I haven't researched it yet. I needed to look into it and see what was going on with it. And then we saw Andrew did a little snippet on it.
Andrew is the host of the Pseudo Archaeology podcast.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, he didn't even do a snippet on it on his show yet.
No, not yet. I don't know if he's going to cover it or not, but
this got him so riled up. He did an Instagram post. Go find Kinkella. Just type in Kinkella. I think it's a Kinkella or whatever it is on Instagram.
Yeah.
He's literally driving down the highway with his phone pointed at him.
Mad.
He's so mad about this.
He's so mad.
Yeah. So that's how bad it was.
I love it. So anyway.
All right. So let's talk about the basics of this, and then we'll get into it. So
yeah.
All right. So this was a team of Italian and Scottish researchers, and one of the big initial problems with this wasn't a peer-reviewed paper that came out in some sort of journal or publication.
Nope.
It was essentially a press release. And they did a paper, but it wasn't peer reviewed, and it was a press release is how basically everybody found out.
Yeah.
But they say they found evidence of a massive ancient city complex deep beneath the Giza plateau.
Yeah.
Plateau.
Pas tu.
Anyway, that's my
ridiculous.
That's how I do French. Yes. So to get to their claims, what they're saying is that these potential structures stretch over 2,100 feet down, with some hinting at much further depths of over 4,000 feet. Yeah. Which is ridiculous.
Yeah. And they're calling these potential structures cylindrical shafts and huge rectangular enclosures.
Yeah.
And they're even going so far as to say even signs of an ancient water system.
I mean, I have no doubt that there's water down there somewhere.
I know. Like, these are just, look, we have said this before on this podcast. I'm going to say it again right here. This is an extraordinary claim.
Where's the extraordinary evidence?
It needs? Extraordinary evidence. And well, as we'll see, that extraordinary evidence is lacking.
So their biggest evidence for all of this, so they say, is they used what's called synthetic aperture radar, SAR.
Yeah, this is a new one. I hadn't heard of this before.
I had. I think we talked about something like this on Archaeotech.
Yeah.
But it's a real thing. Yeah. Synthetic aperture radar that's not a joke.
Yeah.
They use that to peer beneath the surface and generate these images. So what synthetic aperture radar is basically, it's actually using satellites.
Okay.
We've talked about ground penetrating radar before, which is literally radar that's drug across the ground, shoots into the ground and returns these reflections, basically.
Okay.
And you read these reflections.
Yeah.
And people who know how to interpret those reflections, it's not like Star Trek where it returns a perfect image of what's under the ground,
It's
right?
more like a heat map, it looks like, almost. Like,
kind of, yeah.
Like, not really, but like that's sort of how it's presenting.
Right.
Yeah.
But essentially it allows you to see beneath the surface with these satellite transmissions, right? But they can't see. What's one of the biggest things we'll get to right now is one of the biggest criticisms of this is synthetic aperture radar just simply can't see this deep.
Right.
It's not that good a technology.
It's not that good.
Yeah.
And even if it could see that deep, you can't.
It wouldn't be that clear.
It wouldn't be that clear. And you can't make the interpretations that they're making.
Right.
Because what they're doing is they're looking at this really like blobby map with things that look like they're sticking down further than other things. And then creating a 3D model off of that that adds all kinds of like detail and shape to these weird little blobby things that came back from the SAR images. So
I see a giant bear, actually. I think the whole world is on the back of a giant bear is what they found.
Totally. Like, there is so much interpretation here that is just like the human mind just like running away with it. And the 3D models, like, oh my gosh, they're just such a stretch.
I think we're going to find that they were funded by Graham Hancock. But
I know, right? Oh my God. This is going to show up in the next season of Ancient Apocalypse. 100%.
Reading this whole thing, I felt like I was just waiting for him to just pop out from the side of the corner and be like, hey. Yeah. So, but one of the things they did to sort of back up their claims was using ancient Egyptian texts and information, which, as we know, is, totally reliable, is so they suggested that these, because they basically saw something and they're like, okay, what could this be? And they went back into ancient Egyptian texts and I guess mythology, if you will.
Right.
And found what the ancient Egyptians wrote about called a pre-dynastic, so before all the big Egyptian dynasties. So we're talking at least 5,000 years ago that this was written about, or not written about, but would have lived.
Yeah.
An advanced civilization that was wiped out by a major catastrophe.
Oh my gosh. This is right out of a Graham Hancock playbook, like right out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a lot.
Yeah.
Now, immediate skeptics were Zahi Hawass, who was the leading Egyptologist of our age.
He is the spokesperson for Egyptology and for Egyptian archaeology.
Yeah. He called the claims completely wrong and lacking any real scientific backing.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and he's right. Like this SAR stuff, like we talked about, like you can't use it this way. Yeah. This is not how it's meant to be used. And I think it is a relatively new technology, and it's certainly relatively new to use it like this. So like to put such big claims on something that is new and unproven.
Right.
Like, there's no ground truthing this. You can't go 2,000, feet below the surface. I guess you could.
You could drill. Drill, baby, drill.
Below the pyramids, though? Like, who's going to let that happen?
Well, if it stretches out as far as they say, you don't have to go directly beneath the pyramid. You can go right next to the pyramid.
But are you, like, disrupting the... Like,
you're disrupting a lot.
You could destabilize.
Listen, if somebody had good evidence for a underground city beneath the pyramids, the world would find a way to get down there.
Yeah.
Okay. But you need better evidence.
Yeah.
And how and why. And this would be, yeah, sure. There were cultures that lived obviously in Egypt well before the pyramids, right? Mm-hmm. But were they more advanced than the Egyptians? Probably not. Did they have the technology to build stuff like this? Most likely no.
Right.
It just so much like where's the rest of the evidence to their civilization? Yeah. It goes back to the entire ancient apocalypse theory.
It does. It feeds into this like weird modern desire for there to be something bigger than just the ancient peoples doing cool shit.
Yeah.
Like for some reason, people need it to be something more than that. They need it to be aliens. They need it to be some ancient culture that was more advanced and the technology's been lost. I don't understand why. Why can't people just accept that like the Egyptians were awesome? They built these amazing pyramids and they did it with their own knowledge and their own hands and their own technology. I don't understand why. Why?
No.
So frustrating.
Some are suggesting, giving this slightly the benefit of the doubt, that while it's nearly impossible that a massive city could exist beneath the pyramids of Giza, there could be smaller, older shafts or chambers existing beneath Giza, right? Because who knows what's under there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the whole entire site has had a massive, long-standing significance with the people of Egypt and the people before the pre-dynastic civilization. So. I mean, we don't know what was there. Yeah. They obviously chose that spot for a reason. Yeah. The whole Giza plateau was chosen for a reason. So it's had a rich history. So,
I could totally see like, the Great Pyramids being built on top of the place where somebody else significant was buried on purpose to sort of like, draw from that power of the person who was buried there before. I'm not saying that happened for sure. I'm just speculating that could have been something for sure that they did. So, I just, this whole thing is so frustrating. And what annoys me the most about it is that it leaks out into mainstream media. And then all of a sudden places are reporting it as new find below the pyramids. It's like, no. It's not a new find. It's some people who are speculating and putting out these press releases, and it's not peer reviewed. And it's so frustrating that doesn't get communicated by the media.
That's the other conversation that's happening here, is that this press release is put out and the pyramids are always a hot topic.
Yeah. Always.
And it immediately gets picked up. And there's little to nothing that the archaeological and scientific community can do to stop something like this. If somebody wants to put a press release out that says something completely wacky, even though it seems like science, right? They use satellites, they have images, they have these heat map things. Why would they be wrong? And in general, I would say people want to believe stuff like this.
They do.
Therefore, it plays into their natural assumptions. It plays into their belief systems. It plays into what they want to be true, which is why Ancient Apocalypse, was within the top 10 viewed programs on Netflix for a really long time when it came out, if not still. Right. I haven't checked, but
I don't think it is now, but it was for a while.
But it's because people want that stuff to be, I want that to be true. I want there to be a gigantic city under the pyramids that ancient people built.
Yeah. I mean, that would be really cool.
Why wouldn't that be cool? It's just the evidence isn't there.
It's just not there.
The technology used to find it is not good enough to actually find that.
Yeah. And I just can't get past the disrespect to the ancient cultures who were awesome enough to build these things themselves.
Okay, so
they were.
Okay, you're kind of trying to say that people are saying that they didn't do this. This is saying that an ancient culture did do this.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not saying aliens did it.
In this case, it's not trying to say that ancient aliens built the pyramids or whatever. Obviously, they're not doing that. But
I mean, this is saying an ancient culture that doesn't exist anymore actually did this.
Yeah, on something that we can't see or confirm, and yeah. So we linked to two different articles. There's a Newsweek article, which I actually think does a decent job of bringing in the Zahi Hawas's, reasons why this isn't true. Yeah. So that article is pretty good. But then we also linked to the New York Post, and I kind of hated doing that, but there was worse articles out there. But the New York Post one does show you all the crazy like 3D modeling and images that they've created. So I guess take a peek at it if you're interested in the like nonsense, but don't give them a click if you're not interested and you just want to take our word for it.
I'm like, it's really interesting the models they put together from the images that were returned from the satellites.
Isn't it crazy? It's such a reach. It is such a reach. I can't even. But it's not real science. It's not peer reviewed. It hasn't gone through all of the processes that like science goes through before you can.
True. That being said, what do these images return?
Yeah.
What are the rock structures underneath here? Because the pyramid at Khafra,
right?
Yeah, the Khafra pyramid. One of the interesting things about that is where some of these structures were allegedly found, unlike some of the other pyramids, was carved directly from bedrock, like the base of it.
Yeah, the basis.
Right? And then the rest was built on top of that, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like it's bouncing on something as is being kind of displayed here.
Right.
It's literally sitting on bedrock.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Or at least, what we think is bedrock.
No, we're not going there.
Hey,
they didn't. This ancient civilization did not create a bedrock-like substance and then build. That the pyramids were then built on top of.
If something,
no, sir.
If something looks like it's like 50 feet thick rock, and we're gonna think it's bedrock, I'm just saying. So,
but they've also excavated. They know it's bedrock. It's not like some kind of concrete substance. Oh my God, no.
I would never say that. I would never say that. All I'm saying is it's thick enough to present as bedrock. Yeah. So just trying to give something the benefit of the doubt. If it's thick enough and big enough, it can present as bedrock. But if it's not solid rock all the way down to the core or to a water table or something like that, to like an open, spring or water chamber or something, then it might seem like bedrock, but isn't necessarily bedrock. Right. Yeah. We've been fooled before.
Well, yeah, and like different densities of different stones. Like bedrock is not always solidly one type of stone. It could be, there's inclusions and weird stuff that happens geologically speaking. And then that might show up differently in this technology. Sure. The thing is that they're not talking about that. Yeah. They're not saying that it could be that. And that's the problem. So I don't know if different rocks would show up differently.
I don't know either.
But it would be cool if they at least talked about that and said that they would or wouldn't. But they don't. They just immediately go to these crazy that the pyramids are on a table supported by cylindrical columns. Like, what the hell? Oh, my God. I can't. Right. I just can't.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, with that.
Ridiculous.
Yes. I think we'll end this segment. And next week, we're going to talk about our visit to Stonehenge.
Oh, I know. We keep saying that. Sure.
No, next week we are.
Next week for sure.
We don't keep saying that. Last week we said we're going to. No, last week we said we're going to talk about news.
Okay, all right.
Next week we're talking about Stonehenge.
Okay. Unless we talk about news again.
Unless we talk about news. Probably news of Stonehenge.
Look, it's a moving thing. It's a moving target. We do what works for us.
But we're stationary for 2 weeks. We're not actually moving.
That's true.
So, and we're not going to Target. So there's no moving and there's no Target.
Oh, I'm going to Target. I got some Target shops in my future.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Archaeology Show. Feel free to comment and view the show notes on the website at www.archpodnet.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ArchPodNet. Music for this show is called I Wish You Would Look from the band Sea Hero. Again, thanks for listening and have an awesome day.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultura Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.